Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in the space. This week is episode 8 of season 2. We're going to have a chat around gaining visibility and securing your multi-cloud environments using Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Hey, Alan, how was your week off? And are you ready to get stuck into securing multi-cloud?
Hey, Sam. Yep, I had a good week off, thanks. And yes, definitely looking forward to this episode, even though it may not be able to cover everything, as always, at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Let's not waste any time then. Let's just get stuck straight into it because yeah, there is quite a lot to cover here. So yeah, as we mentioned, we're going to talk around Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Alan's going to take the role of the expert, and I'm going to fire questions to try and extract as much knowledge that I can from Alan in the next optimistic 45 minutes. Okay, cool. Alan, to start off with, then, can you just give us a high level primer on what Microsoft Defender for Cloud is?
Sure. So, Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a cloud security posture management tool with the ability to protect workloads in the cloud. It was originally called Azure Security Center, and all the APIs still say, Security Center at the moment. But we talked about it in the first season. But since then, Microsoft have invested quite a lot of money and time to bring it up to multi-cloud. That's part of the reason why it was rebranded to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, not Azure, so that it's identifying it as a just not just Azure platform, even though that's where it sits. Um, and some of the bits that you can get out of it is, like I said, you can protect workloads within Azure and some other clouds, but also you can see your security posture and your regulatory compliance that kind of comes from some of the Azure policy we talked about 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Okay, so can you just give us a primer on security posture and how Defender for Cloud is giving us that? I assume what you're referring to is sort of visibility of the security posture of all of our resources inside of Azure.
Yeah, absolutely. So Microsoft provides a dashboard that allows you to see your security posture. So they give you a percentage out of 100, kind of similar to the Microsoft 365 Secure Score, where they've got some recommendations and some standard sort of baseline side things to help you see where you are in your in your security posture. Um, but within that, it can be broken down to different areas like where are you with MFA into that environment, or your network configuration. It covers quite a lot of the Azure services. Well, it does cover all of it, but some of the recommendations that it will show to improve your score, um, yeah, they're in there, kind of thing. So
Okay, great. And so, what you've described so far is it gives me visibility of my security posture. So, can it also help me with remediating that if I want to change my security posture?
yeah, so as part of that posture level, it's obviously doing checks against the environment at different various times. Kind of what we were saying about the Azure policy 4 or 5 weeks ago. It's um, at different times. Um, but yes, it will give you some of those remediation tasks, and within there, it will tell you in effect the steps you need to take to change that configuration or to make that change to that application, etc. Um, and some of those tasks can be automated. They can be just a one button click fix, and it will just run the the API call to enable a setting and things like that if required. Um, but within that posture, some of these remediation tasks might not be required. And I say that in that if, for instance, you're using a third party like Okta or Ping Identity that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, um, they may be doing the MFA prompts for you as you come over. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud is unable to see that sort of authentication and to validate it. So what you can do then is within Defender for Cloud, you can then put exceptions in for a period of time and put a justification so that it's all audited. Um, there may be other things like a virtual machine requires endpoint protection, and it's recommending Defender for Endpoint. But again, you may have a third party AV that it's not able to detect. So yeah, there's a few things where it makes sense to put exceptions in to then recheck in a year's time, 6 months time, etc.
Okay, so there's two parts that I suppose there's Microsoft's sort of opinion and best practice that which you may want to exclude and ignore, and you might want to have your own take on things, and then there is an inherent um, there's an inherent a part of that which is the computer can't know everything, or the scanner can't know everything about your environment. So it might be, an exemption needs to go in place in order to bypass some of its limitations. Yeah,
Yeah, and that exemption is the reason for exempting is that you say I have a third party product that's doing it.
exactly.
It's
Yeah,
not I'm exempting because I don't care about it kind of
yeah,
thing. It's you validated at that time that you've got the controls in place,
yeah.
and then you'll just put in the exception in.
So it's gonna give you visibility of your sort of problem areas, yeah, which might be false positives, right? They might not actually be problem areas. So it's gonna give you either advice on how to remediate or help you to automatically remediate, and then it's also going to give you the ability to sort of override its recommendation and say, no, that's not actually the case in my scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, and within Azure, if you're using management groups, you can see it at the management group levels as well. So if you've got a production environment, you can see all those subscriptions within that environment and the aggregated like posture score and things like that. Um, One thing we probably haven't covered, we've talked about posture score, is the regulatory compliance. Um, there is a separate section in Defender for Cloud that allows you to choose if you've got them deployed. So Defender for Cloud can deploy them for you, or you can use Azure policy, as we talked about with you, Sam. Like I said, 3 or 4, 5 weeks ago now, um, to do that, and it will show you all the controls in a maybe a nicer view for a CISO and things like that to be able to go into a portal and see it, because you can export a report a C-suite, in effect C-suite report that's like high level about what you covered on as well.
Yeah, I think what Defender for Cloud is really good at, sort of versus policy, is really having that dashboard and single pane of glass view. Right, I do think it's really well constructive in terms of how intuitive it is to drill down and to explore inside of that product. Right, and I think we use it a lot as well, because in addition to policy, to get greater visibility. Right, we might use policy to do the locking down and putting compliance in place, but actually Defender for Cloud is a really good one stop place to see everything in one go.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So what environments can be connected to Defender for Cloud?
So as people may know that the Azure Security Center probably was only Azure at the time, and then there was some functionality to talk to Amazon Web Services, AWS, and Google Cloud Platform, GCP, um, where in effect you spun up their security tooling in that environment, and then in effect pulled the information from there to Defend for Cloud. Um, but now with probably October, November time last year, they brought out sort of native cloud security posture management. So instead of using a first party tool in that cloud, they're doing it directly now. So the connections then, in effect, when you connect them, it's scanning the environment or environments, and then bringing that information or high level information into Defend for Cloud to then benchmark against uh, a regulatory compliance. So that could be CIS, NIST, PCISS, etc. Um, so that's at the moment, and I believe it's still going to stay. That is free to do that CSPM sort of scan or view of those environments, and it brings them into the same dashboard, and you can see a percentage against those three clouds. Um, so that's really good from the cloud environment, but also using Azure Arc, you can bring on-premise servers into Azure, which then means they can potentially benefit from some of the security workloads.
Okay, so really, well, as you said with the rebrand and rename, it is really a standalone product from Azure, right? Azure itself is just another environment for Defender for Cloud to actually access. We're actually talking about a system that can bring in multiple environments into one single security like pane of glass, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we start talking about the protective workloads and things like that, there's obviously a lot more for Azure because it's first party in effect, but the other clouds are improving rapidly with capability.
Okay, so it seems almost too good to be true that we can connect all of these, seemingly different environments into one place. How hard is it actually to connect these? What does a deployment look like? Do I need to get somebody like you in to do it?
So I think previously with the old connectors, there's obviously a lot more infrastructure on the third party clouds to set up. So it did take quite some time to set up, and there was a well potentially there was an additional cost on that side because you have to spin up those security products to be running. Um, but with the new connectors, um, you can bring one of us in, but generally it's not too difficult to create a connection for AWS. It's just a understanding the account number, and then deploying a CloudFormation template to then create that connection, and then which in effect it's just building it's just creating some roles within that environment, read only roles, for so that Azure can read the information or scan the environment. GCP is similar in that it generates a script for you, and that you can just deploy that script to the project. um, but what I will also say is that for both AWS and GCP, if you've got for AWS an organizational account and organizational account, you can just target that one, and it will allow you to do the CSPM across all accounts attached to it. But you can't do the protective workloads at that level. It has to be per account. So if you've got that organizational account, you've got hundreds, I say tens of hundreds of accounts, then that's probably the best way to get that visibility quickly. GCP similar in that there isn't really an organizational account or project. But what it does do, if you want to do it that way, is it will build a new project that becomes the all seeing for Defender for Cloud, and then it's able to read all the other projects.
Can you just quickly explain to me what you mean by a protective workload? And because you just used it in the context of there is you could, if you used it on say the root account for AWS or the I can't remember what it's called, it's organizational root account of AWS, then you would only get CSPM, wouldn't you? And posture
Yeah.
cloud platform posture management. But then you said we wouldn't be able to enable protective workloads. So could you just give me just a really brief thing on what protective workloads are at a high level?
Yeah, sure. And this is probably the bit that we could probably speak for an hour, 2 hours on anyway. But
Okay.
yep. So protective workloads are services that you pay for within the different clouds that allow you to, in effect, protect that service. So if we talk about the other clouds, because Azure, there's about 11 or 12 to briefly go through. So AWS and GCP are fairly similar. So you can protect your servers in either of those. So that is, in effect, via Azure Arc to see to get the logs from them is one potential, but also to deploy Defender for Cloud, Defender for Endpoint even to it, because that's part of that license. Um, it also allows you to run vulnerability assessments against the operating system, and there's a few other bits in there. The other areas are databases and containers. So most of this is um, Kubernetes databases and SQL Server on the compute or the EC2 machines. So it's able to do vulnerability scans and things like that against them and look for potential attacks. So that's the AWS and GCP, and that is growing, you know, quite rapidly. With Azure, you've got the server workload, the same, with virtual machines and on-premise servers. You've got app service databases, which includes all the or majority of the database available on Azure. So Azure SQL database, open source relation databases, and Cosmo DB. It also includes SQL Server on machines. So that includes if you've got SQL Server running on a Azure virtual machine, but also on premise. It covers storage accounts, containers, key vaults, resource manager, and DNS. So some of these is more around securing or looking at the transactions happening on those services and doing detecting potential threats. Some of it is actually doing vulnerability assessments. So with SQL, you can run a vulnerability assessment against the database itself to see if there's some misconfiguration in there. And things like DNS, it's looking at what your virtual machines are talking to and if they're trying to go out to the internet and things like that. The server workload in at least in Azure and AWS, there is like 4 or 5 different features within that. Things like just-in-time access, so you can open up ports just when you need them, and that you can do that now in AWS, I believe. So, but yeah, there's tons there, and we could talk about it for ages.
So when you're talking about like a protective or protected workload, um, you're not just talking about the security posture of the platform itself or what you can configure via the portals. You're actually drilling down to those actual resources and getting specific insights from them. So like you've used the examples of, say, servers, being able to deploy Defender for Endpoint onto them and to get their logs and to understand like what's the configuration of the machine itself, not just say its firewall rules in Azure. If that makes sense,
Yeah.
you're actually diving into those. Um, and so okay, so that seems really powerful, and I think you mentioned it briefly in there. But how is that? How is it licensed? I assume that I don't know. Tell me how things are licensed in the Defender for Cloud world.
So in Defender for Cloud, it's generally per server or per X amount of transactions, depending on the service. So if it's a physical machine, then it's per server. If it's like, for example, Key Vault or Resource Manager, it's per transaction it scans, and generally, I think so for Azure Resource Manager, it's for every 4 million transactions or API calls that's you going through the portal, things changing within the portal. Um, it's like $4 per month or $4 per 4 million transactions, which is insane. Unless you were really doing a lot of API calls, a lot of changes, you wouldn't really see that. Same thing with like Key Vault, where it's by transaction, storage count, same thing, transactions in and out. And again, it's in the thousands or the 100,000s, things like that. Yeah, majority of it is based on, it depends on what it is. So I think app services per app service itself, and some of the other ones like the Azure SQL or the SQL Server on machine is a bit different. It's more around per instance, and I think it's per CPU core as well. So it can get a bit confusing. But when you go in to Defender for Cloud, you can there is a workbook you can use, and it will tell you the estimated cost because it can see all those statistics. So you can see, oh, it would cost me if I enable Defender for Server, then it would cost me this much per month. And again, we could talk about it for ages because there's also some benefits if you've got Sentinel with SQL with Defender for the server workload that you can save some money in Sentinel as well. We could, there's loads of different sort of benefits. But yeah, so you can see it, and you can turn on workloads um, per subscription. But everything in that subscription, if you enable the Defender for Server workload, then everything in that subscription that's a server will be automatically added and billed for. So you can't pick and choose certain servers within a subscription, not unless you've got separated subscriptions, and then you can do it by the subscription itself.
Okay, so licensing is done at a subscription level with all of those, whatever resources there are for those protective workloads
Yeah.
inside of there. Um, is there a trial that I can test it out with? How do you sort of start to onboard with it?
Yeah, exactly. So yes, there is a trial for 30 days when you first go in there on a subscription, and you can enable it. It allows you to use all the workloads. Um, like I said, the cloud security posture management majority of it is free. The only bit that isn't is the regulatory compliance. So to enable that, the cheapest way to do it is to enable the Azure Resource Manager because it's going to be you're never going to spend $4. I don't think, not unless you're it is a massive environment.
Okay. And so is there a free version of Defender for Cloud that you can use, or is it either trial and licensed, or because I suppose there's the CSPM part of it. Is that just the sort of free tier element that we've got?
Yeah, so that's the only bit that's sort of free. The bits you can do with that is you'll get all the remediation tasks and things like that for your Azure and for the other environments. Um, but you will be able to do the Azure security benchmark because that is a free sort of it's not regulatory compliance, but it is a standard that Microsoft have, which is based on some of those regulatory compliances. And again, we could talk about talk about that for quite some time.
Yeah, as its own thing. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
But yeah,
Okay, so in terms of, can we just talk about how an organization might utilize the output of Defender for Cloud, right? So I'm a security team, working on an enterprise's, Azure. Well, not just Azure. I need to forget about that. It's not Azure Security Center anymore. It's everything. But I'm a security team. You know, do the owners of these subscriptions, what sort of permissions do I need to be able to view the Defender for Cloud output? Is it just one team in my organization that you would scope it down to, or would you actually have, say, the owners of resources, resource groups, and subscriptions actually looking at this information as well?
yeah. So from a RBAC perspective, you only need reader access to view the scores and the regulatory compliance. To be able to do any of the exceptions and a few other bits or enabling some of the workloads, you need security admin. But who should look at it? Well, you should definitely allow the owners and the users of those subscriptions. But you're right; it should be probably other people, the security teams that are looking after that environment. You may even you may or may not want to, but you may even want someone from the C-suite that has a vested interest in that environment. Maybe it is the the CIO or the CISO that needs to make sure that we are going in the right way with it, and maybe they just see that single pane of glass across all of their cloud environment to be able to see that we are increasing our secure score. We're at a good level because getting to 100% is, it would be great, but how much resource do you need to put in to get to that? What's acceptable from that perspective?
Yeah,
But
because
but yeah,
do you see security posture as a journey then that people will go on, right? Because I suppose in order to remediate and to improve, you have to be able to observe and gain visibility. So Defender for Cloud is giving us that, isn't it? It's right. It's gonna benchmark our environment. It's gonna you know show us the good and the bad, from that environment. And then at that point, it's going to help you to plan and help you to move the needle over time. You know, we've talked about secure score, and there's many different viewpoints of secure score, but let's just take secure score as a valuable metric. Um, how let's say I scan, I'm a 50%, let's say, right? How do you approach with talking to a customer or client about how you plan that remediation, and sort of what level should you go to? Are you aiming? It's out of 100%, right? So like what is reasonable for companies to go through?
well, I think it's dependent on the organization, because you know, and it depends how big. I guess some of the resource, how big the environment is as well, because it depends how you've got to you've got to understand what the risks it's identifying from the remediation tasks, because some of them, I guess you may be mitigating the risk yourself, or you can take that risk. It may be that the risk is small to make that change, but to make that change is a huge impact to a product, maybe, because some of this stuff is, it's easy to enable. So one of them is, we always talk about storage accounts because it's the bane of everyone's sort of cloud environments.
100%.
Um, is that at the moment, you're using a public storage account to push data into, and it's not going over a VNet or a network. It's going from the application that might be third party into it. Now, the recommendation is to not use public storage accounts, and you have a potential mechanism to move it onto the VNet or onto a network, but you've now got to ask the developers to re-engineer what they talk to, or re restructure the architecture of that app. It's not a whilst it's just a flick of a switch from one side, the impact of that is app stops working. So there's a bigger impact on other changes. So it's definitely a journey. There are quick wins. There are ones that are um, you know app service and enabling SFTP, you know, instead of FTP only. Um, that may interrupt how builds get pushed up, but that's probably a simple configuration change from a client end. Um, or you're not using it, so you can just turn it on just to make sure that you're protecting. Um, so there are quick wins. We've been there, and some of it is relatively easy to improve that score, and some of it might just be enabling MFA. We all there are organizations out there that haven't sort of done that yet or in the process, but you know enabling MFA potentially stops the the bad actor from getting onto the portal to do whatever they need to. So it's high impact. Well, it's high increase in security, but relatively low impact. So the the remediation task gives some guidance on how many points they will increase and what percentage increase they will have to that score. So you can start to prioritize some of that if you want to jump the score up in big numbers. But sometimes those remediation tasks are the easiest to do, but from an actual security perspective are uh, not irrelevant, but they don't really help with your attack surface too much. So there's a bit of that with that. Um, I guess it's different when we look at regulatory compliance because organisations need to meet those controls. But again, it is all broken down into control 1A, part B. These are the remediation tasks to make that part compliant.
It's almost more simplistic with a regulatory compliance framework because you've got those controls that are the opinions of other people that you're all agreeing to follow, whereas the secure score is an arbitrary number in effect, that is prioritized by Microsoft. So it is sometimes harder to make to have people understand what that secure score really means and what a good benchmark of secure score. Because if you think about people that maybe work in like the net promoter world and things like that, they might be looking at like they might think that a good benchmark is 90% for NPS, net promoter score is like, I've got to be over 90, I've got to be over 90. Then they get benchmark at secure score and it's like 46. Do you know what I mean? And that's half of where they think they need to be, if that makes sense. And I'm sure there is room for improvement and low hanging fruit at a 46, right? Because like, is it like MFA is like 17 points, 17% or something like that? It's quite high, isn't it? It's it's
It
it's
it
it's
can be
huge, isn't it?
depending on how much
Yeah,
variety of workload you have in the environment. So if you're
yeah,
using a lot of different Azure resources,
yeah.
then that obviously that percentage is less.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So there are some, like Alan said, some really quick wins. Is there any other aspects to Defender for Cloud you think we've missed or not talked about? I think you've got through those bits really well. I can't think of anything else on
so
Defender for Cloud that you haven't already covered.
I do. Um, One part is they've recently brought in is a governance piece. So this gives you the ability per subscription to um, give those remediation tasks to certain users. Um, so you can say so from the remediation tasks, you can select all of them or specific ones to maybe a type of service, so say SQL, and you can say when a resource, if it's new or if it's current and someone's made a change and it becomes non-compliant, then it can be the remediation task can be assigned to somebody, and you can set criteria like they have 14 days to remediate, and they're allowed to extend that, but they have to give a justification why. So, from a regulatory compliance or the posture score, the security posture, you can see where people are with those remediation tasks and if they're out of you know overdue and things like that. Um, and you can do that via. You can also do that via if this resource has an owner tag or a tag with a email address in it. So going back to tagging, whenever we did that with cloud standardization, um, you can in effect if something is already tagged with an owner, then we can just use that to start assigning these tasks, and that owner can then give it to someone else in their team. So maybe it's the team lead of SQL, and then they pass it on to one of their colleagues. Um, so it just gives that ability to track where people are with that remediation and if they've completed it. So that's coming recently.
So that's going to give a life cycle and management to those remediation tasks, right? You're actually going to be able to keep people engaged on that journey, aren't you? Assign it to somebody, all agree some sort of timescale for it to be in place by, because some of these remediations might not be absolute priority because you know they're potentially best practice and not actually being actively exploited or anything like that. So you can agree, okay, Alan's got his app service that he needs to remediate. Let's assign him a task and give him a reasonable deadline, that we can all work towards some sort of timeline so that we can keep everybody happy. And then we can keep the whole team honest in terms of their progress and moving things along, because these things can get pushed to the wayside, can't they? That does happen, especially when things aren't being actively exploited, and it's more of a best practice regulatory compliance, a goal and achievement, because you may be bringing in some sort of regulatory compliance that needs to be in by a certain date because you're having your first, maybe you're having your first audit at some point. You bring in 27001, you've got the auditors coming in, the end of the year. You have to make sure you're remediated up and get yourself ready to go, at that point, right? So this is going to handle that life cycle for you. Yeah,
Yeah,
really good.
and it also helps with going to those regulatory compliance audits and showing that you're at least attempting to get them remediated. You've got the plan. Yes, you may be, you may not, you may only be 60% compliant on NIST as an example, but you've got the plan of what you need to do. At least you're not like, oh yeah, I think I'm 60% and I don't know, kind of thing. At least you've got that visibility.
Well, the worst place to be is with absolutely no visibility, right?
Yes.
Because first comes visibility, then comes plan, and strategy on how you're going to do it, and then comes the remediation, isn't it? And like you just said there, is the visibility seems, from what you've described to me, visibility is relatively simplistic to enable. You know, a lot of it is just turn it on and maybe pay for it. If you need to do that, and then you can work on your remediation strategy, and it's got all of the helpers in it to help you to facilitate that as well with your resource owners. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other part we haven't really talked about is we talked about the protective workloads, and they're doing they're protecting key vaults and storage accounts, etc., and SQL. But it does generate, if there are potential attacks or tries, then it does generate alerts. So you do see those, and you can get those sent to an email address. But also you can integrate it into Microsoft Sentinel. So then you can get alerting into your SOC or to your third-party SOC to see those potential attacks. So the example is if you've got virtual machines with management ports open, SSH or 3389, and people are probing it, it will give you an alert with the information about what country it's coming from, and you know potentially it is an attack because they're like scanning and things like that. And same probably I think with your app services, things like that, it will tell you if they're doing scans against the public IP addresses.
Okay, so it's not just configuration, it is also behavioral analysis as well, and capturing alerts that can be fed into other, like your
It seems, yeah.
Sentinel, your seams, to give you, visibility of the security incidents that you may be, undertaking, having in your business. Yeah, that's really powerful.
Yeah, and you have got the portal and that. And I said about the work. There's a workbook in there for costing, but there is also quite a few APIs on Microsoft Graph or the management graph, management Azure endpoint, that allows you to potentially pull this information out as well if you wanted to generate your own reports, or if you needed some other dashboarding, or even just get a list out, without having to try and export it from the portal.
Okay, yeah. So if you've got, say, another way that you want to manage it, maybe use Jira, and you wanted to bring it into there as a list of, actions to track against people, there are ways to get this information out. It is relatively open in terms of, pulling, yeah, information out.
Yeah, and I think it's all in the is it the Azure Graph Explorer?
Yep,
Was that, yeah,
yep.
in there? And the Azure Graph Explorer also has all of the other clouds information as well going into there. So then you can analyze all of it.
Okay, yeah, amazing. Any other bits that you want to explain to people, Alan? You're still 5 minutes under, our estimated time, so I think you've done really well to get through it so far.
I
Um,
I probably rushed to make sure I got all the key stuff in, thinking I was going to overrun. So um, bad planning for me, I guess, or maybe good planning. I don't know. Um,
no, seems great.
uh, I guess talking about, if we talk about one of the secure workloads for 5 minutes, we'll try and keep it within 5 minutes, and that's the Azure workload and server. And I kind of mentioned it before, but there's quite a lot of benefit there. So there's two plans for it. There's a plan one and a plan two. Plan one is to give you Defender for Endpoint to license servers, and that's on-premise servers as well using Azure Arc. Um, there's been an announcement that I can't remember where it was now, in 6 months or 12 months time, you potentially won't be able to get the Defender for server or Defender for Endpoint for server license, um, you know, without going through Defender for Cloud. Um, so it'll all be licensed through that. So that's plan one. Plan two then gives you all the other benefits. So that is um, network hardening. I'm not going to remember all these. File integrity and what I was talking about before. That for each Windows server, well, for each server, but primarily the benefits on Windows servers, that any of these security logs that come from it that go into a log analytics, so for Sentinel, you get 500 megabytes of ingestion per day included. And if your server is a domain controller, it's probably going to be doing more than that. But that 400 meg per day is something like I think it's like £23 a month or £40. So, and I think the SKU for that license in Defender for Cloud for Plan Two is like $15. So it almost pays for itself and more. Um,
Yeah, because if you were to manually ingest via um, without going through Defender for End, like through
Defender for Cloud,
this
yeah.
Defender for Cloud, you'd pay more money, wouldn't you? So you actually save quite a considerable
Yes,
amount
it's
of money.
cost
Yeah.
neutral, but that's based on you ingesting the full amount. If you're only doing like 100 meg, then it doesn't. It's still like it's a saving, but not enough. But
Okay, got it. Yeah.
it then becomes a little bit confusing, complicated, in that for each server you go, have this benefit for that's going into that log analytics. So, say you got 10 servers, that's 5 gig a day ingestion for servers. It is aggregated across all servers. So, if you've got some quiet servers and some really loud, noisy servers, then it's the total for that table in effect. So, actually, if you've got some servers that are doing, say you got two domain controllers that are doing, you know, 2 gig each, that's 4 gig, and then the others are just fitting in that space, you're going to save quite a bit there.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
and the savings only on if we're talking about Sentinel, it's only the savings only on the log analytics piece. It's not on the Sentinel piece. You still got to pay the Sentinel piece, but in effect, you're paying half for those bits. So it is a saving still. And if you're going Defender for Endpoint, then you're making even more of a saving there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, that's really good, and I think like you mentioned before, there are nuances to these, the workloads that you pay for. There are benefits to each and nuances and what you get out of it, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
it can be a little complex to take an organization through that thought process to what to enable and when and things like that, right? It's not just
Yeah.
I'll just switch it all on at $15 a month, because there are there's different there's two different plans, isn't there, for servers? So
Yeah.
you might actually decide, you might have to want to have a conversation about, right, okay, let's just go plan one for the moment, because we don't need that extra functionality X, Y, and Z. So there is a little bit to decide when you're going through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, like you said, it's not really a turn everything on and see, because potentially there could be a large bill. You do have to check costings and understand, I guess, prioritize which workloads you want to enable.
Okay, great. Anything else you want to take people through, Alan?
No, I think that's probably it in the quick view of it. The only thing actually to say is that Microsoft, like I said before, Microsoft have been investing lots of money into this and time and engineering time. I've been part of the private previews and the private preview community, and I've seen a lot of the upcoming stuff coming, which I can't talk about. But I know that from workloads for Azure, there is 4, maybe 5 new workloads coming for various things that aren't covered yet. And it's quite exciting about seeing them, because we've done some testing on some of those, and some of the stuff that's come out now, like the governance piece I was talking about. I was one of the private preview people that were looking at it, so you can get involved as well. It's not just down to um, Microsoft partners, things like that. It can be customers as well, providing you've got NDAs in place with them. Um, but yeah,
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think it's just positive to see that this is an area that is rapidly expanding, and they're investing into. There's more and more technology coming through, which is almost just some of it is just extra capability just being added to it automatically, right? So yeah, it's a great product to look at. Okay, so let's do a little bit of reflection. Let me just mirror back to you what I think you've told me, and we'll see how wrong I am. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud, it's not just Azure; it's also multi-cloud and even on-prem. So it's almost a standalone product in its own right. I know it lives in Azure, but it does connect many different environments and systems. um it's relatively easy to connect, to gain that visibility. As you said, the CSPM, the cloud platform element of it is free, kind of a no-brainer to enable it. Why wouldn't you, really? And it gives you that visibility across. It can potentially give you visibility across your whole estate, well, a large part of it. And as we've talked about many times before, visibility is a really important aspect to the cloud, because there can be a lot in there and it can be complex. um, Gives you a single pane viewpoint of your security posture. So we've got security score as a relatively simplistic metric, but then also we've got the breakdown into regulatory compliance, if that's something that your organization is aligned to. Also gives you the ability to view the remediation that you need to do. So Microsoft will give you the guidance on that. It will give you the guidance on the remediation that should take place, and it'll also give you the governance and support on how um, to enlist people inside your organization or your wider team, maybe your partners and things like that, to actually to track remediation and give people roles and responsibilities with remediation. And I mentioned it a bit at the start. It's not just cloud; it can also protect on-premise workloads as well, um, which is um, which is an important distinction in the hybrid cloud world. Because it is pretty rare, for a large organization to be cloud only, right, and to have absolutely nothing on prem. So Microsoft is thinking about that, and making sure that they've got as much visibility as currently possible. Okay, so anything else that I've missed there, Alan, that you want to clarify or tell me that I'm wrong about?
no, I think that was right, and it's just reiterating that Microsoft are putting a heavy investment in this product
Yep.
and in developing it for multi cloud.
Okay, great. So next episode, we are going to talk around Entra permissions management. Um, Microsoft recently made an acquisition, and permissions management is now being included under the new sort of Entra um, brand, if
Umbrella,
I call it
yeah.
umbrella brand. Permissions management comes from a product called CloudKnox, which was an acquisition from Microsoft, and it can give you sort of insane visibility in terms of your permissions creep inside of Azure, and not just Azure. It's multi-cloud, isn't it? Right. So you've got Azure, AWS, and GCP. So yeah, we're gonna talk. We've had a bit of time to play with permissions management, and to kind of understand the value that it can give you. So we've spent a bit of time digesting it before running an episode on it, because it is it is relatively new to us, and new to every, well, in terms of in Microsoft, it's very new, right? So if you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future. We have many topics that we'd like to cover, and your listens and support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
We also have the ability for you to give us feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Did I miss something? Is there something else you want us to dive into? Maybe it's the workloads. Um, so yes, and even if that you want to tell us that we weren't great on this episode, or we need criti- uh, critical feedback is also okay. But yes, so in the show notes, there's a link there to a form where you can fill out your feedback, and then we can take a look at it.
Cool, great. Well, thanks very much for that, Alan. That was a great whistle stop tour. You did great on the timings as well. So yeah, everybody thanks you for that. So yeah, thanks, Alan, and thanks everybody for listening. Catch you on the next one.
Yes, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and speak to you soon.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye bye.